this is art of, by, and for the people of Cape Breton Island, but it's also of, by, and for the people of Unama'ki. And what does that really mean? What is the meaning of that?
That's David Stevens, a settler folk artist based in Unama'ki, Cape Breton, who has been creating work professionally in Nova Scotia since 1984. David is one of 49 artists participating in Proletariart 2025, the Cape Breton University Art Gallery's recurring public and unjuried exhibition. In this first episode, David and I discuss the significance of Proletariart, as well as the ins and outs of curating the show. Along the way, our conversation is interrupted by a surprise fire alarm on campus, but we soon turn to delve into some of the works on display, including David's own solemn and powerful installation, 12 Men Gone. This podcast was recorded in Unama'ki on the traditional and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The Cape Breton University Art Gallery recognizes its role in honoring the treaties of peace and friendship, with a commitment to continually learn the truth of our collective history and build towards reconciliation and authentic allyship. I'm your host, Greg Davies, and this is the Strait Narrow. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Now, we know each other pretty well, so we can just get right into the heart of things here. We're going to be talking about Proletariart, technically Proletariart 2025, which is the version of that show that we've been doing for a few years now, at the CBU Art Gallery, which runs, it's actually on right now and continues until September 19th. And David, when we first started talking about this, you'd expressed an interest in discussing, in making this a topic of discussion for the first episode. So maybe we can just lead off with some of your thoughts on what it is about this particular iteration of this show that kind of got your interest.
Yeah. I've attended every Proletariat since the beginning, and I can't recall what year this is or what number this is.
I was trying to dig around to see which one was the first, but it certainly is long before my time. So.
Yeah, I think we're in year 9, I think.
Yeah,
maybe 10.
That sounds about right. And I think it was Laura Schneider, my predecessor, who started that.
So it could be 10, 10th one. And like I say, having attended every year, this is the first year that I felt what I said to you previously, that this was like walking into a magical mystery tour, and that does date me in terms of my era.
Are we allowed to make that reference?
Yes, really.
Beatles aren't going to sue us for that.
Going back a long way. But for me, in terms of art, there has to be something inherently magical in every piece of art, and there has to be something with a bit of a mystery. It has to engage the viewer enough to say, what's going on here? What's happening?
Right.
Why am I moved by this? Even if that ends up being anger, or you're frustrated, or you're upset, or whatever, the negative reactions can be just as valuable as positive ones. And so I walked in there, and it seemed that there was a theme, a continuing theme, almost as if this was a curated exhibit, not a general call from the public or to the public to submit pieces as they pleased, without jurors. So I wanted to ask you then, and I am asking you now about this. It seemed to be the smallest in terms of the volume of work submitted that I've seen, and that may play into this magical mystery aspect that I see of it, because there seems to be this common thread told, a storytelling going through the exhibit. Which really isn't intentional, because most of these artists, most of these makers, individuals don't know each other. And in terms of how you decided to mount the exhibit and the juxtaposition of certain works and so on.
Yeah, well, as you know, I mean, it really is luck of the draw with Proletariart, because you really don't know what you're getting until you've received the last work. That
Right.
closing date for submissions is over, and you can finally sort of lay the work out and have a look at it. And as a rule of thumb, when I'm approaching Proletariart, because it actually is quite a difficult show to curate. As you said, you're not dealing with any particular theme that's uniting these works. You kind of have to look for that and see what you can find in it. And so it is luck of the draw because, you get what you get. And if there isn't really much cohesion between the works, and especially if you get a lot of them, if you have a significant number of works, then you really kind of end up mounting it as a salon-style exhibition, which has its limitations for sure. But every so often you luck out and you get just the right number of works for the space so that there's room for those works to breathe. And you also get themes that sort of bubble up to the surface as you're looking at them. 2 years ago when we did the last Proletariart, it was ducks. We had, for some reason, people were really quite interested in ducks. And that's kind of great when you hit that kind of thing, because it allows you to connect some of the works fairly easily. This year it was cats and clowns.
Yeah.
And which is a really interesting combination. I have to say, as a curator, it's quite fun to sort of see these things, and intriguing, because this really is an index of what is of interest to people across the island.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not provoked. You're not giving them a set of parameters to create artwork and respond to it. This is entirely what they want to do. So when you see those themes coming out, it can be a little inspiring as a curator to see those things and try to find ways to connect them in a way that's going to be meaningful or resonant for the visitor.
Yeah. And as you say, cats and clowns and everything in between, I guess, and ducks one previous year.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you wonder what's going on out there in the world in general.
That's right.
How these themes seem to pop up. Or are you and I as artists seeing this through artist eyes and seeing that many other people may not see?
That's right. And, some of the works that we receive are works that have been put together by people who are not working professionally as artists, and some of them are just starting out. Some of them are very young. And then we have works that are by established artists, including yourself. You have a work in this show. Oni Nordman is another established artist. Angie Arsenault has 4 works actually in this show, but they're presented as a single piece. But you're all professional working artists with a lot of experience, and those works are being placed alongside people who may not have much experience at all.
Right.
And the trick of it is to make sure they all talk to one another and that there's a kind of equity amongst these pieces, because we're not creating a kind of competitive environment with the artwork. We want these works to talk to each other and again, to resonate for visitors.
Yeah, and in the title, the play on words, the title, of course.
It's a great title. I didn't come up with it.
Yeah, and it does play into that.
Yeah.
Because, again, there's no hierarchy, there's no stratification.
Yeah.
And for the viewer, particularly someone who isn't engaged with the local art scene and isn't knowledgeable about who's who in terms of professional artists, they walk through there, and even though they see a name associated with a specific piece of artwork, there's nothing there to denote the gender, the cultural background, the heritage, the age, political background or stance. There's nothing there other than the name to go by.
There's a measure of anonymity,
Exactly.
for sure, which I think is an asset for the show, quite
Definitely.
frankly, and for people presenting.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we chatted a little bit about this topic of conversation a little bit before getting into the studio here. But I think there are a number of things that come out of this exhibition. I don't mean just this particular version this year, but the concept of Proletariart. One of which is about creating an inclusive and equitable environment for people to present artwork. And you were chatting with me previously about the value of breaking down those barriers, especially for people who feel a little anxious about coming into an art gallery, or not having the language and so forth, which we've talked about before, is in reality is actually something of a myth, but it's perpetuated year after year, and people do kind of absorb this. They internalize it and carry it with them. And the part of the point of Proletariart is to break that down. So it's wonderful when you're having an opening for a show like this to see people coming in and you see the smiles on their faces, and they're genuinely enjoying the experience of being there, and they don't feel as if they have to have a certain level of language talking about art, because it's not really relevant in this case.
Yeah, and there does seem to be that level of intimidation that a lot of people have. Just when you mention something like art gallery, it seems to be formal to a lot of people.
Yeah, and art galleries, one way or the other, have kind of preserved that.
Yes.
Because for a lot of people, they are sort of like shrines to art.
Yeah.
You know, it's like sacred ground when you walk in there. And when you have a space where you have white walls and track lighting and so forth, it does create a kind of
Clinical sense.
clinical, but also precious.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to knock that, because anybody who's produced works of art and they see them in the studio or outside of the gallery, when they go into the gallery and they're actually hanging on the wall with good lighting, it does transform those works for sure.
Exactly, and that ties into what I started out with in terms of the magical and mysterious part of it. Because, as you say, a lot of these people having these works in their home, they may have it hanging in their kitchen or in their bathroom.
That's right, yeah.
Or just stuck in a drawer somewhere, or up propped up against the wall and never seeing the light of day.
Right.
And very few people actually seeing and engaging with the work other than family. Mm. But then when it gets set in this professional, shall I say, setting, that it does take on a different life, I believe, just for the fact of being in that setting and having the proper lighting, and the fact that it's alongside of other works. So it brings life. It allows the works, I believe, to come to life and to come to light, because it's almost as if they're characters there enjoying the company of one another, separate from their makers.
Right.
It's like children playing together in a playground setting, and just enjoying one another. It seemed almost like each work was a chapter, or even a passage in a book, and then the next one seemed to lead into another chapter or a passage of a book.
Right.
It could be a paragraph or even a sentence.
Well, it's like putting together a movie. You know, you structure the frame, you structure the colors and the clothing, and even the sort of textures of the film in order to provide those visual cues that, on a subliminal level, I guess, connect the dots. And you probably, I've said this many times before, and I'm sure you've probably heard. Maybe if I'm repeating myself, you can just let me know. But my feeling about the curator, the role of the curator, is that the curator really needs to be invisible. When you're putting an exhibition together, you kind of do your work, but people shouldn't see your footprint or your imprint on the show.
Right.
Your task as a curator is to make sure those works talk to each other, and you're putting the artist or artists forward. So you become kind of like an invisible player in all of this, behind the scenes, kind of orchestrating things so the best of that shines through. And that I think has to be your task as a curator. And sometimes it happens relatively easily, as in the case of this show. I think I feel quite comfortable with this particular iteration of the show, but it's mainly because of the works more than anything. So there are some works that, you walked through, and some of them stand out for me. There's a work by Fern Donovan, for instance, which is a small painting of a cat. But the cat's actually wearing sort of a colorful polka-dotted clown outfit.
Yes.
It's very playful. It's beautifully done. It's a very delicate watercolor, and it's beautifully rendered, small scale. And that was positioned next to Oni Norman's work, which is titled Career, which is a large-scale work. It's a large piece of fabric that's hanging from the wall, and it has these sort of tumbling cats on it. It's very playful.
And I heard a reference opening night several times from people saying that's a Persian rug.
Yes.
With the cats in it. So
That's
yeah,
right.
So again, a play on words. And
Exactly. Yeah. And those are the little subtle things and the more you spend time with the work, the more you realize, these little things in here. That was kind of a fun work because there was at one point I had to decide, do we lay it on the floor,
Right.
in which case the cat is sort of rolling on the carpet, or do you hang it on the wall, in which case the cat is sort of tumbling down like a waterfall, which is what we went with. But that, to me, there was just no question that Fern's work should be next to it because they just spoke to each other so perfectly. But then you position them as well so that they're located in the gallery space as visual cues for people to pick up on when they're walking through the space. So, for instance, there's a work there's a work by River Stevens, which is featured in the show, if I'm correctly pronouncing this, Putup, which is a sort of abstracted painting of a whale. The form is recognizable, but it's somewhat abstracted and flattened out. There was a lot of emphasis on line and bold colors in that work, and to me it's a very striking work. It's one that he actually did for the Creative Catalyst program this past year, so it was exhibited earlier this year down in Elderwick Center. But that particular work, when I looked at it, it was the curvilinear forms in it that really kind of spoke along with the colors. And so I positioned it at one end of the wall with another work, Bill Tobin's Melody in Wood, which is a large sculptural piece. And as the title suggests, it references music. It has a guitar that's built into it, but it's also in the shape of a treble clef. Yeah. And so that bookends that wall. So you've got Rivers painting at the one end, and you've got Bill's sculpture at the other. They're not, content-wise, they're not related.
Exactly,
but formally, there's a wonderful connection. Yeah. And when I put that in there, I was thinking of the whale, and the first thing that comes to my mind with a whale is the sound, the sound of the whale call.
Yeah, definitely.
So it was a kind of musical thing that worked for me. And as I thought about the forms, I think we've got a fire going on.
Fire alarm. Oh, well, there we go.
We're going to pause for a second here while we step out of the building so we don't burn.
Yeah, exciting.
All right. So, David, we're back after the fire alarm. Everything's calmed down here on campus.
Never a dull moment.
No, we try to keep it lively here at CBU.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were talking about the work by River Stevens and kind of linking that up with the work by Bill Tobin at the very end, Melody in Wood. So just to get back to the point, the general point in discussion, which is how to connect these works. Some of those cues, the visual cues, kind of unite works that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be linked.
Right.
But that I think it's like reading a really well. You're trying to set up conditions for the visitor so that, like an author writing a book that's really engaging, you want to leave enough room for that person to fill in the blanks and kind of be a participant in the experience of it rather than having it all lumped and handed over to them. Yeah. So that, to me, is part of the trick of doing curating, and you just strive to do the best job you can with that.
Yeah. And I've been in exhibits before where the curator set up a theme and told a story. And would actually write that down in a catalog.
Right.
And so anybody that would come in to view the exhibit, if they read through the catalog, read through those notes first, they got a kind of an introduction. Sure. It was had like a novel.
Yeah.
Something that would lead in and name the players and name the actors and
absolutely
name what's going on and how things are flowing.
Yeah.
And that with Proletariart, that doesn't exist.
Right.
So it's more hands-on in terms of the viewer comes in and is met by the work with nothing there other than the title, Proletariart.
Right.
And the other would be that is public art exhibit, and it's works accepted from anybody and everybody with no jurors.
Yeah.
So the storytelling is more, I believe, in terms of how you actually positioned each piece. As you say, this bookending of works and juxtaposition of works and so on. It's almost as if I feel that you're creating a narrative, and there's a collection of narratives within that. So it can be broken down into individual stories and/or chapters in a book or what have you, passages in a book.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next one. But the theme kind of continues on because we're talking about human beings and life and all sorts of aspects of what it is to be engaging with people.
That's right.
Which is what Proletariart allows people to do. There's people meeting people face to face in there at opening night, engaging with one another and talking with one another about all sorts of things that are going on in the world that are relative today.
Yep.
And yet they're in the midst of all of these interesting creations.
There's a kind of parallel with live performance here. You know, if you think about John Cage, for instance, and the idea of performing where it's the audience that's actually the performance, the sounds, which are unique in that particular moment.
Yeah.
The same thing happens with an opening. So, you know, the meaning of the works, if you're attending an opening, especially where you have family members of the artist present and they're talking with people, and maybe you overhear a little bit of the conversation, or as you're walking around, you're picking up little bits of things. You're walking away with little bits of information about those works, which then impact the way you're looking at it.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, is also easily overlooked. But when you talk about it as we're doing right now, it all sort of makes sense that this is how we arrive at meaning. When we go to museums or art galleries, we often rely on the descriptors to provide the information. It will educate us on what this thing is. And people will often walk away from that feeling that they now have the complete story behind it, which, of course, is a fallacy. But when you're going to an opening, and I generally tend to prefer exhibitions that don't have a lot of didactic information behind them, but rather just leave the aesthetic experience to the viewer.
Yeah.
But if you're attending an opening, you have that advantage of people talking about the works, and sometimes even the creators themselves if they're present. Yeah. And that does impact the way you're seeing that work quite heavily. And I think it's very easy to sort of discount that aspect of the experience. Other aspects include things like sights and smells. You know, if you go to see a work in a church, for instance, when they've got the incense burning and the candle light and what have you, profoundly impacts the way that you experience that work and the memory of it as you walk away.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you walk into somewhere like the CBU Art Gallery, you've got track lighting, which is generally fairly high key, sort of even lighting, but spots on the wall to pick out certain works. But that's a very different kind of experience. Yeah. And all of that has an impact on the way that you experience the work.
Yeah. And as you say about, other senses being triggered.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the visual.
Yeah.
And in today's world, of course, we don't have the use of oil-based paints as much as we did years ago.
Right.
And when I was just a kid engaging with art, acrylic polymer mediums, as they were known at the time, were rare. That was something that, at least here in Cape Breton, it was difficult to get that.
Now it's the opposite.
And now it's the opposite, So nobody wants the oil paintings anymore. But I do recall a number of years ago having a studio in the Khyber building on Barrington Street in Halifax. And as soon as I'd walk up to the second floor, and there were so many other artists there at the time who had studio space, and at the top of the stairs, you could get this sense of the oil paint itself, just the paint itself.
Right.
The oil-based mediums.
Right.
The turpentine.
Yeah.
Versol, all sorts of smells.
All that stuff.
And it is just such an interesting smell to pick up on that sense of that walking into that studio. And I've also on rare occasion experienced that in exhibits where you could get within a foot or two of a painting that was done maybe 6 months ago.
Right.
And then you pick up that smell, and it's like that essence of that individual is in there, or the essence of the actual artwork. So it's almost like it's this living entity itself. It's triggering something else in your senses, not just the visual.
Right.
And it's saying, pay attention to me.
Absolutely.
You're drawn into it. And so there could be a familiarity there because it brings back memories.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. while we've got you at the table, I know you have a work in the show, which is a work that you produced a number of years back, which is a very powerful work and very specific to the history of Cape Breton and a fairly recent history. Did you want to talk a little bit about that work?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a difficult one to talk about because there's so much to say.
Yeah.
and it's difficult to just, compress that down without expanding on it and telling the broader story.
Right.
But others can, if they're interested in listening to this, or if they walk into the gallery and they see it, they can ask questions and they can go further and, explore further about what that story is about. And for me, I believe it was 2015, there was an exhibit at CBU Art Gallery called Mining Legacies. And it was a couple who were traveling across the country, and they were stopping at different traditional mining communities across the country and eliciting works from artists in each of those communities to tell a story about what it was like growing up or living or being part of, integral to these mining communities. And so they came here to Cape Breton, and I was intrigued by just their concept of this, first of all. And where I don't have anybody in my family directly related to mining, even though we all in Cape Breton here are inextricably linked to that, just as to steelmaking as well. But nobody in my family ever actually worked in a mine. And there were other participants or most of the other participants that year, they did have direct links to mining. So I knew I wanted to tell a story related to mining, but from the outside and being affected by mining from the outside, even though being a small community, it's something that was always there. And the only time I ventured down the mine was at the Miners Museum, which a lot of people do, and that's the only sense that people have of going into an actual underground mine. So that work is called 12 Men Gone. And my point of reference was, it references the number 26 mine disaster, which again, people can look that up and research that for themselves. But to a lot of people who are going to be listening, they know right away when I say those words, number 26 mine disaster, they know what it means to them personally. So a local well-known singer-songwriter, Alistair McGilvery, wrote a song commemorating that event, that tragic event. And the song was called 12 Men Gone. So my work is an interpretation of his song, not so much an interpretation of the story he is telling within his song, even though that's integral to it. It can't help but be integral to it.
Right.
But because I'm removed, and I felt that, and I still feel that, I'm not in any position of authority to speak about that tragedy. And I'm certainly not in any position of authority to speak about life in a mining community, growing up in a mining community. So I'm telling a story visually of a story that's told through a song.
Right.
And the Men of the Deeps have adopted that song, and they sing it worldwide.
Right.
And it stirs, again, getting back to a work of art stirring an emotional response. And that song itself has stirred such an emotional response in so many people worldwide who, a lot of them never knew about the actual disaster.
Right.
But
right.
in the telling of the story, that message comes through.
Yeah.
So again, I was trying to tell that story visually. And in order to remove myself as far as possible from it again, it was a concept. So it's not so much that I'm hands-on. It was my concept of this. And the concept was the so-called trucker's cap, we call it, this baseball-style cap, is kind of synonymous with a lot of blue-collar workers. Mm-hmm. And I would go out on a limb and say that almost every person that's worked in a mine here in Cape Breton has at some point in time worn a baseball cap or a trucker cap or whatever, one of those style caps.
Yeah.
And tying into that theme of baseball caps and teamwork, and unity and being part of a team, part of something larger than yourself. So the baseball cap kind of denotes that. So each of these caps commemorate the life and the times of each of those men that lost their lives in that tragic situation. But it also reaching out to represent their families, because it's about what has been born out of that. What were their lives like
Right.
going forward?
Right.
What are their lives like today
Right.
for the remaining family members?
Yeah.
And
Which is interesting that you noted before, you were very specific to mention that in creating that work, you were referencing the song.
Yeah.
Because personally, you don't feel you're an outsider looking in.
Exactly.
And out of respect for those individuals and for the families and for the community.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing to know. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, definitely. And I try to bring that to all of my own art making.
Yeah.
If I'm removed from it, and there's no way that I can become even slightly integral to it,
Yeah.
I'll always stay removed from it. But it doesn't mean that I can't tell a story based on being that participant observer or the outsider observing,
Yeah.
or looking through a magnifying glass or
Yeah.
what have you, or looking back through a library, going through a library and looking for references
Yeah.
to stories that are long gone.
Yeah. Now, for the benefit of the listeners, of our listeners right now, can you just briefly describe the work as well, so there's sort of a picture they haven't, if they haven't seen it before?
Yeah, so there's 12 black baseball caps.
Yeah.
And again, each one is representative of each of the individuals.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to name the individuals,
No, of
but
course.
they are named in the song. Their last names are mentioned in the song. And anybody that wants to do the research, the information is out there. And so I had, as a concept, I came up with that, and I just wanted to have the who, what, when, where, why kind of idea. Just what is this about? So there's number 26 mine and the date of the disaster, and that's embroidered in gold thread
Yeah.
on the black baseball cap. So it's a way of drawing a news headline in a really concise manner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hoping to tell that story without being really explicit and deep into details.
Yeah.
And the way that it's displayed, the lighting provides shadow, and the shadows are just as important as each of the individual hats. So each individual hat has its own meaning, and together collectively, because these are, as the song states, 12 men who are gone. They were just totally removed from their communities. So it's like a baseball team, or a group of men where they had this sense of camaraderie.
Yep.
And it was a bond that only they knew, even though others could relate to it. But where they were there together, only they could relate to this. So it's not about the individuals. They're all wearing the same hat. So it's a sense of uniformity, even though each one does represent an individual and represent an individual family. And that story, I think, is told in the shadow, the space of the shadow and the light, created by the hats against the wall.
Yeah. I saw this particular piece as something quite profound, and it needed space on the wall.
Yeah.
And fortunately, because of the number of
Exactly,
works that came in, we were able to do that, because we had talked about possible other arrangements, which to my mind would not have been as successful, would have been a compromise.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we were able to do that.
Yeah, and that does, again, come down to that role early on in the podcast when I asked you about, as a curator, mounting this exhibit. So with regards to my work, 12 Men Gone, the last time it was exhibited was here in 2015. Then it all went into a plastic bag. The taps were stacked together in a plastic bag and stuck in my closet, which, as I mentioned earlier about other artworks that were here in Proletariart, where somebody may have had it leaning against a wall or something, and somebody else said, "Why don't you enter that?"
Yep.
So 12 Men Gone went into hibernation, which essentially happens with all too many works worldwide in collections. Works end up being in collections, but they never see the light of day. A lot of them
often
are
happens,
wrapped up in the bubble wrap or whatever and put away.
Yeah.
So that story rested, which to me was still telling a story, because the men themselves have been at rest all this time.
Right.
And hopefully their lives and their families have found a sense of solace and rest and removal from that day and getting on with their own lives. But it's always there. It's always present. So I always knew that work would have to come out again and the story be shared again.
Yeah.
So it was a natural way to share it in a public venue because there was no theme, no overarching theme.
Right.
But again, if it wasn't for the actual formal gallery space and the formal gallery lighting and the way that you set this up with the lighting telling the story, because the second part of the story is the shadows. And the shadows are something you can't create without the artwork. But you can't create it without having that setting. So it's meant to be as one body of work in a formal setting with that type of lighting.
Yeah. One of the things I was going to bring up also, because we've been talking about the value of the show for the community, and one of the reasons why the show persists, because this is an exhibition that I inherited. It was passed down to me when I came out here in 2017, and it was one of those shows that as soon as I heard about it, it was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. We're going to carry on this show because I can immediately see what the value of this is to the community. When people see their work in a gallery, it's a chance to see their work in a light they've not seen before, and for family and for members of the community at large. And I think that's another aspect of the show that's really important too, and I hope people connect with that when they come to see it. That as they walk in, they're seeing work by people from all walks of life, all levels of experience, some of them professional. There's a bit of a mentoring thing that goes on and all of that. But for people who are looking at this and thinking, well, maybe I could go into Proletariart at some point, I hope that they do that, because you never know whether that might lead to something, where they pursue it professionally or even just as a passion.
Even just talking about art
Exactly.
and talking about that exhibit
Yeah.
and sharing that experience with others.
Yeah.
And then perhaps others will be intrigued and say, well, what's that all about? So it does come down to that sense of community, because it's a reflection of, a small reflection of who are the people in our community and what are the things they're doing. There's some reason why each of those individuals decided, I want to be part of this. I want to submit a piece. I want the world, basically, to see out, no matter how big or small that world might be.
Yeah.
I want others to engage with me through my work. And I think a lot of artists want that. Most artists want that. But how do you make that happen? You can't just make that happen unless you go up in public and show your work in public. So this exhibit does allow that. So many people look forward to it. I know people who come back, this is their second or third or fourth year.
Yeah. It is very much an important show for all the reasons that we've been talking about right now. And in terms of its future, where it goes from here, I think we can expect to see more Proletariart exhibitions down the road. And there's not a lot. I think you had asked me at one point about whether there's anything that would change or, I think in truth, no. There's always a bit of a risk with Proletariart when you put the call out. I have to be honest with you, sometimes it's a little anxiety inducing because you just don't know whether people are going to respond at all. And if they don't, they don't. But you just never know. And sometimes you get swamped. And sometimes you get just the right amount to fit in perfectly in the show, which is what happened this time around. But that risk aspect of it is also important, because that's basically the nucleus of the show. If people respond, they respond. It's their show.
Exactly.
We're just the facilitators. But this is really Cape Breton Unamagi's show.
Yeah, and in today's world in particular, we're always so aware of the fact that inclusivity is so important. And I feel that's what Proletariart allows. Not only allows, but it in a sense, it demands that, because it's indiscriminate in that sense. There's no hierarchy. There's no stratification.
There's always a challenge, I think, for art galleries and museums in terms of the stories that they present through the art or artists that they host in the shows, which is when you're putting together exhibitions, especially if you're doing like an open call for submissions and you're accepting proposals from artists, one of the first things I now ask is, where does the community factor into this? Where does the audience factor into it? Because some artists will try to present something that they feel is what the public wants. But unless they know the community, unless they've given consideration to what that experience is going to be like for the person who comes to see it, in some ways it can be an exercise in futility because nobody's really benefiting from the show itself. Yeah. And then maybe it becomes just a check mark on a CV or what have you. Yeah. And while I understand the logic of that, especially from the position of somebody who is trying to build their career and move forward, I think there's a danger in that, in the sense that you can never lose sight of who that audience is, because they're the ones who are giving of their time to come and see what the artist is presenting, to hear what that artist has to say. Yeah. As the artist, you have to be respectful of that. And as the gallery, you have to try and facilitate that so that that window that you have to present that show, out of all the shows that you get to choose from, that window has been thoughtfully considered and awarded to somebody and to the public in a way that's going to be beneficial to all. I think that's one of the major challenges for art galleries at this point in time. Yeah. And so when we're talking about Proletariart and giving that window of time to Proletariart, that is something that has been carefully considered.
Yeah, definitely. And again, in today's world, we're in a setting, in an art gallery setting, in formal type settings and openings, there's this sense of acknowledgement, the land acknowledgement, and of this is Cape Breton Island as we know it, but it's also Unama'ki, and it's that first and foremost.
Yeah.
And so that also plays out in terms of Proletariart, because without that sense of this is art of, by, and for the people of Cape Breton Island, but it's also of, by, and for the people of Unama'ki, and what does that really mean? What is the meaning of that? And how does that play out in the artwork? Because we do have to acknowledge that. So it does shape who I am as an artist, somebody who was born and raised here, but also somebody who lived away, lived in a lot of different communities, and came back here. And in that time of that truth and reconciliation, knowing that importance of that, because I've seen it in other communities across the country firsthand. So I feel it's very important that Proletariart, to me, it does convey that. Again, there's nobody there jumping in and saying, well, this is only for a select group. So it's about being inclusive, but not inclusive to the point of saying, well, this is just something we have to do to be politically correct.
Right, yeah.
Or acknowledging Unama'ki and what that's all about, rather than simply doing it because, it's something we have to do to be politically correct.
Right.
So it's about engaging and people getting to know each time that acknowledgement is stated, that this is integral to who all of us are. It's a reflection of something much larger, because we are an island. So
yeah, absolutely.
That makes any sense or not.
On that note,
yeah,
I want to thank you, David, for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts on this. It's a really interesting conversation.
Definitely.
Enjoyed that thoroughly.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been listening to The Strait and Narrow, the official podcast of the Cape Breton University Art Gallery. Our sound technician today has been Derek Gallant. I'm your host, Greg Davies, curator of the Cape Breton University Art Gallery. Thanks for joining us today, and please stay tuned for further episodes featuring more guests from Unama'ki Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and Atlantic Canada.